Welcome to the This Week in Cleantech podcast. Each week we speak to a leading CEO, executive, thought leader or insider in the cleantech sector. Each guest shares their thoughts on recent events, their own cleantech story and their vision and hopes for the future. This week our host David Hunt is joined by Hugo Tilmouth, CEO and founder of ChargedUp, dubbed by the BBC as the Boris Bike of phone charging. ChargedUp has a distributed network of shareable power banks across London, allowing their users to keep their mobile phones charged up wherever you are and whenever you are out and about. Hugo has ambitious plans to scale internationally. Before we start, a reminder that you can subscribe to the This Week in Cleantech podcast via iTunes or all of the other usual podcast platforms. That's enough from me. Let's hand it over to our host, David Hunt, with our guest for this week, Hugo Tilmouth.
Hi there, Hugo. Thanks very much for joining us on the This Week in Cleantech podcast. I know you have already on Monday a hectic week going on and ahead. Just wanted to start the conversation a little bit by talking about yourself, and then we'll talk and sort of move on to ChargedUp. But in terms of getting to where you are at this moment in time, what's your journey been like in terms of moving from education and now into leading a tech startup and things getting quite exciting?
Sure. Hey, David. Great to chat. So my background, I guess, is it started with a passion for engineering. I've always been, from a young age, taking things apart, getting my mom super mad, breaking things potentially as well, but always trying to figure out how things worked. Rebuilding as well, and really trying to, I guess, understand the world through the machines that were around me while I was growing up.
Okay.
So it's always kind of been part of like what makes me is a real passion for building, innovating, and coming up with new solutions for things. For example, I remember at a very early age, I wanted to create a door opener. I think I was maybe 12 or something, and I ended up taking apart my mom's old DVD player and using the motor from that in order to power it, which obviously didn't go down too well, considering that the family wanted to watch DVDs. But anyway. The learnings were great, and obviously I ended up then studying engineering with a specific focus on the renewable energy side of it. So as I grew to understand the problems of climate change, as I'm sure all of your listeners are totally aware of, it became something that was really important to me, and I thought, what better way of getting involved in it than to study renewable energy engineering? So I went to Exeter and ended up doing both an undergraduate degree in that, but then also coming and doing a master's in renewable energy engineering as well. So while doing that, I did a number of different, tangents along the way, both on the kind of corporate side, but also on the startup side. And I guess over that time, I got more and more passionate about the impact that you can have when working with a startup. Yeah. Rather than just being, a small cog within a massive machine, you can make a massive difference to, the perception of that organization, and you can really see what you're impacting every day. I'd say one of the there's two real defining startups that I worked at. One of them is a company called Pavegen, which is led by the fantastic Lawrence Kimball Cook. So their company basically it produces energy from footsteps. So you just walk over the. You may have come across them. You walk across the tiles and it generates electricity to power lighting and other IoT applications. And I was really interested in what they were doing and how they were kind of hustling and being able to secure all of these big deals with large corporates across the globe. And that really kind of sparked my interest in the startup world. I then went on and worked with a company called Tilt, who were later acquired by Airbnb. They were basically building a social platform for payments. So really not not at all in the energy sector, but really interesting in terms of the power that an app can have. That's where I really learned about the kind of product side, and how you can build something, that works on one phone, make sure it's all robust and works properly, but then it can be used by millions of people without any real change on your side. And that power really interested me. So I think that's where my kind of passion to get involved in a startup came from.
Okay. And again, I think that you touched on something there, which is always an interesting, is that challenge or intersection and dichotomy, really, of a large corporate versus a startup. And increasingly, at some point, those two worlds merge, usually through some form of acquisition or investment. And we'll move on to those things, because I know that you've been involved in some sort of investment platforms. So having come from, as you say, dismantling things and that sort of real genuine childlike passion to learn and to influence and to sort of make stuff work. I remember doing similar things with clocks that didn't ever go quite back together again, which is, I guess, why I'm not an engineer. So you've had these experiences. What was the sort of genesis of ChargedUp, which you created, as I understand it, in sort of 2017?
That's correct. Yeah. So there's a few things that kind of intersected over, I guess, a 6-month period. I have the story that which is very much based on the truth, that I was at a cricket match at Lord's, having a really nice day watching the cricket, but I was actually expecting a call from Microsoft about a job opportunity there. And my phone was obviously, it was a long day. I was starting to run out of charge, starting to get a little bit nervous about the fact that this call was coming in, and I might not be able to take it. And I knew that it was, it was kind of the last stage. So if I didn't get the call, they might be scheduling the meetings or the next stage interviews for, the next day. So I might miss out on the opportunity. So I ended up then going to a corner shop just outside of Lord's and buying a power bank. The guy charged me, it was, I think, 20 quid or something. It was quite expensive. And I ended up having to, fork out that cost, and it was actually a completely useless power bank that then ended up breaking, which is obviously, terrible in terms of the sustainability as well, because I was literally effectively using it as a disposable power bank. As I'm sure you're aware, lithium is a finite resource, so we definitely shouldn't be just kind of tossing it away after one use. So the story is that I then, ended up taking a Boris Bike home, and the idea of a sharing power bank network came to me on that ride home. Unfortunately, it's not quite true. Months later, I had one of those charging lockers in the office I was working at.
Right.
And we were all charging our phones in that, getting super annoyed at the idea of having to leave them in a locker. And then just seeing the rise of things like Uber and Airbnb, the Boris bikes at the time. There's obviously a load more that have come out more recently in terms of the sharing bikes like Ofo and Mobike, and then looking at Lime and Bird in the sharing scooter world as well. There's and Zipcar as well on the cars. There's loads of companies that are kind of getting into this space. But at the time, I was inspired by the Boris bikes, the idea of being able to take the power with you and share those power banks, rather than either being tied to a pocket or a power or a charging locker. That really appealed to me. And yeah, that's kind of where the idea came from. And then 6 months later, we had a prototype working with the software and the hardware. We were manically 3D printing at about 24 hours a day, making all of the components to be able to actually start manufacturing. And eventually, we came up with a solution that we were able to start testing with people, and they loved it. So we did a festival down in Cornwall, where we got people to charge, borrow batteries and charge their phones using a very early iteration of the ChargedUp system. And we got fantastic feedback, and that kind of gave us the confidence to start trying to raise some funds and really get going with the business. And start getting it out there in the market.
Start on the journey. It's always nice to have those sort of stories, I guess, for the investors and for the websites and indeed podcasts along the way. But it's good that there is actually that sort of a genesis of innovation. At this time, at least, ChargedUp clearly is quite localized in London. Our audience is quite international. Just briefly, perhaps you can share a little bit of what the ChargedUp system is and how it operates, and then obviously later on we can talk about what plans you have maybe to expand upon that.
Sure. So like I said, the easiest way to think about ChargedUp is the Boris Bikes analogy. The BBC actually called us the Boris Bikes of phone charging. So I don't know if we want to have that association, but we've got it anyway, and people tend to understand it when we explain it that way. So we have at the moment 250 locations around London. These are places like bars, cafes, restaurants, hotels. Anywhere where there's people spending time, you can go to I guess it's like a toaster-sized device with 10 batteries in it, in little slots. You can then use the ChargedUp app to rent one of those batteries, which will then be automatically released. And then you just pay for the time you've used in order to charge your mobile device. And the power bank itself is the size of about a large iPhone, and it has all of the cables included in it. It's bright green, so you definitely won't miss it. You can then charge up your mobile phone about 2 times over, and it charges at the fastest speed that the iPhones can take. And it also has cables for all Android phones, so micro USB and USB Type-C. So then when you finish charging your phone, you can drop it back to any of the stations in the network. And the great thing is, obviously, loads of people can use those batteries over and over. So it's not just limited to the one person who buys it, for example, from the corner shop I was talking about earlier.
Yeah.
We've seen 10 people use the same battery, over the course of a couple of days. So it's great because it means that we can share these resources, which are obviously very, they're very limited. So it has a real nice green aspect to it as well. So which fits in with my interest and background.
Sure, and as I understand it, the energy you essentially buy for the recharging is renewable energy as well.
That's correct. Yeah. So the charging system itself has a kind of green element from start to finish. So the energy that obviously we source the batteries, so we're using the sharing economy to reduce the demand of lithium. So we're obviously reducing the demand at the beginning. Then when they're in the network, they're being powered by energy offsetting through a partnership with one of the large energy providers in the UK. To power it with green energy through the Hugos system. And then once they have finished their life in the ChargedUp network, because obviously at some point they will start to degrade and stop being quite so useful, we've committed to recycle the batteries. So we really want to make sure that the system has the smallest impact on the planet as possible. It's really important to all of the founders.
Sure. Yeah. A small impact in that regard, but big elsewhere, I guess. I mean, we've all been, or I certainly have recently. I was at a trade show in Vienna, and there was one of these more traditional phone banks, as you say, where you essentially have to lock your phone away whilst it's charging, which was helpful, but certainly not the most helpful because you're without them for quite a while. But beyond that sort of very obvious thing of, I'm out of power, I need to make a call. We touched on before how increasingly we are living our lives through apps and cities becoming much smarter, and everything from your home security to turning on your heating and lighting is much more than purely communicating requires a phone and a phone with charge, of course. So from a smart cities point of view, and as we evolve towards a much more connected, much more app-based society, there's much more both demand for usage on our phones, but also for the various different use cases. And I guess that's an exciting thing and a big opportunity for you guys.
Yeah, for sure. We obviously like to think that we're part of the smart city infrastructure that is obviously being built by an awful lot of much cleverer people than me. in terms of the really high-tech IoT type devices. But at the end of the day, if your phone is dead, you do lose, I guess, a real lifeline. We use it for everything from being able to, like you said, call people and text people, but increasingly people are relying on it to be able to actually get to wherever they're going, for example, using City Mapper, or being able to then find their friends using WhatsApp or iPhone equivalents. Then actually being able to have a good experience as well, because we use it for TripAdvisor and other apps to actually find the place that they're trying to go to. And then when you're trying to get home, you need to use Uber. So basically, the entire experience is based on having a mobile device.
Yeah.
Let's not even talk about the payment that's going on through people's phones as well, like we were working on at Tilt. So it really powers the modern world.
Yeah, I say is everything. I should say you can be without your wallet and you can pay through your phone, but only if you have charge. I was actually writing an article recently for the guys at Fully Charged, and I was trying to sort of think through all the applications or use cases that we have now through a mobile device that didn't exist 10 years ago. And I kind of got bored after about 10 minutes of writing down all the various applications that you need your device for. So it sounds quite a typically sort of fun startup, innovative idea. Go to a festival, try it out, all works, iterate a few times. But the reality of any startup, both and specifically technical startups, are hiccups, challenges, highs and lows. And so far, and we'll talk about the future, but so far to date, what have been the particular highs and lows since you started the company a couple of years ago?
Sure. There's obviously been all sorts of things that have been great along the journey. And I definitely like to focus on the highs along the way and make sure we celebrate the big successes that we've had. The team works so hard, and it sometimes you kind of get a little bit lost in all of the noise that's going on and forget what an exciting thing it is. When something great happens to ChargedUp. So yeah, we always like to celebrate the big things. But something that happened recently that was really exciting is myself and Hakeem, the other founder, we were at an event in London at a venue, and there was a chap that we were talking to, just completely separately from the company, not talking about anything ChargedUp related, and he'd actually just grabbed a battery on the way to coming to this event, and just seeing a customer out in the wild with no connection to us. It was really quite amazing, and he was so happy to have the service, and he really was. He was really blown away that he was speaking to the founders just at basically a party.
Just for random, yeah. Cool. Okay. And again, appreciate it is good. And I think a lot of entrepreneurs, a lot of startups don't always focus on celebrating the victories, large and small. Clearly, from a learning perspective, those learnings often come from the difficulties as much as they do from the successes. And obviously, want to focus on the negative. But have there been particular things that have really the team yourself have come through that are sort of challenged that you've learned a good deal from?
I guess one of the most challenging things as a fast-growing startup is actually, I guess, finding the best talent. Like we've had fantastic success with the people that have joined the team so far, but now we're starting to expand the team, and it is tricky to hire and expand the team and keep the culture as you grow. So I'd say that's one thing that is we found more tricky than I guess the tech side and the sales side.
Yeah, I think that's often something that's overlooked, and obviously raised my hand in terms of vested interest. Clearly, my business is in sort of talent acquisition, so I understand that world very well. But I think that's something people often sort of miss. You think about the funding and the finance, you think about the technology iterations, you think about sort of funding and other issues. But yeah, team is everything and culture is everything, and in a startup even more so than any business. Getting it wrong or getting the wrong sort of individuals into the business, be that from a cultural point of view or from a talent point of view, is can be very difficult.
Yeah, for sure. Sure. Yeah. No, it's something that takes a completely different skill set. You can master the numbers and you can learn how to make things work, but HR is not something I think any of the team had much experience with. So it's been a real learning curve, and we're really excited about the new people that are joining as well. So it's obviously going in the right direction.
Yeah. And again, you've had some news stories I just saw on Twitter this morning, the link up with M&S. Are you able to share a little bit more about that? And again, we have a mutual connection in Jerry Stokes. He mentioned some other sort of things on the horizon. So whilst we're celebrating some successes, what other sort of steps are happening at the moment which are taking the business forward?
Sure. So yeah, we're really excited to be able to announce that finally. We've been sitting on it for what feels like ages now, waiting to be able to make that public. But so the guys at Founders Factory, which is backed by Brent Hoberman of lastminute.com and made.com, they made an investment into ChargedUp at the end of last year, and they're a corporate accelerator that connects startups with large corporates such as M&S, EasyJet, Aviva, and there's a number of other really fantastic companies that they connect people with. And we've actually been brought into the retail cohort, and that is actually invested in by M&S. So the guys at M&S have been absolutely fantastic in pushing, the red tape out of the way, and so that we can get a trial underway in 8 of their London stores. These are some of the highest footfall stores in the capital, and it's obviously really exciting for us to be working with such a large retailer at this early stage in order to provide our phone charging solution. And yeah, it's going to be really exciting once they start going live.
Sure. Yeah. No, and always association with those sorts of brands, whichever the sort of locality, but those sort of international or very widely known brands is always a good association to have. And clearly, it's good that they've been involved in the funding aspect. Again, we work with a lot of startup companies who are either in an accelerator or have engaged with some form of institutional or corporate investor, as much as with VCs. Again, without breaking any confidences, and can you tell us a little about the funding journey so far? Because any form of tech takes cost to iterate and to develop, and as you say, from 3D printing yourself, once you start to get to scale, you have to look at manufacturing. All these things cost. So what's your journey been so far in terms of funding and financing your efforts to get to where you are now?
Sure. So very early on, we received a couple of grants from some really awesome corporate partners such as Shell and Ecotricity and O2 in order to kind of fund the initial prototyping and getting the product, I guess, initially manufactured. That obviously, it only took us so far, but it was incredibly helpful at the time. And because of the green element to the solution, we were able to tap into some of the corporates that want to support startups that are helping make the planet a little bit more sustainable. So that was really great at the beginning. We then managed to attract the attention of some private investors who really bought into the vision and supported us with our first round of investment, equity investment at that point. And since then, we've actually raised another round of funding, but unfortunately, we haven't made the announcement as to who exactly is involved in that. So I can't talk about it too much yet.
Sure. Okay. But that's that's round A. If you've done seed funding so far, and are you able to sort of disclose loosely the numbers so far, or obviously happy if you don't feel appropriate to do so at this stage, but just a flavor for the sort of the size of the scale up and the size of the funding that your idea has been able to generate.
Yeah, sure. So I guess initially the round would have been called a pre-seed, and then the round that we closed just before Christmas would be considered a seed round, and that total funding so far is around 1.5 million.
Okay. Okay, so I guess there's a couple of things that jump out in terms of the ask. One of which is we touched on before is in terms of expansion geographically, and the other, of course, is around sort of IP because there's is essentially sort of a battery you can borrow to some extent. Anyone can do, but clearly you've got sort of some advantage in terms of being out there in the marketplace. But I guess there's some sort of IP or some form of systemization that you have to help you expand and maintain your marketplace.
Yeah, for sure. So we're very much focused on scaling the network as quick as possible. The battery technology itself is we've clearly had to spend a lot of time developing the ability to make it shareable. But as I'm sure you know, the power bank market is quite saturated, and lots of people are manufacturing power banks these days. So there is a lot of competition out there. But in terms of the way we're doing it in this shareable fashion, that's something that really gives us the edge because it allows us to tap into, I guess, really different places that people can actually grab a battery. For example, your local pub might not consider selling power banks, but the landlord or the manager, they've really taken to having charged up stations located on their bars, and it allows the consumer to be able to grab a battery when they need it the most, rather than just from an online store or convenience store as they traditionally were available from.
Yeah, I think that sustainability thing is quite an issue. I was recently in New York on business, and my battery pack sort of died. Whether it was just the change of sort of the plug off for whatever reason, but it just literally died. So I had to go and acquire another one. So again, not the largest cost in the world, but there is a cost issue, and there's also a sustainability issue. So, at what point do you think we'll see ChargedUp outside of London?
Sure. So we're pushing to expand across the UK as quick as possible throughout this year, and then we're looking to start going international early next year, which is really exciting for us.
Yeah, sure. I mean, have you ideas as to locations? Because I guess in one, you can, an obvious place we talk about is, trade shows where you might get sort of 80, 90,000 people in a trade show over a few days. So, in isolation, those sort of sites would be, I guess, useful and worthy. But once you start looking, as you say, on a city scale where people can pick one up in one place and, take the bus or Uber or whatever and sort of drop it back at a different location, is a slightly different dynamic. But are there particular sort of cities and or locations that are first or highest on your agenda?
I guess it would be the places you'd expect. The places that have the highest adoption of similar technologies. The sort of place that a network such as Offo Bikes works very well would be a clear contender for us. We haven't again announced the cities that we're going into next, but I think you can probably make the jumps yourself as to where we're looking at. Really high mobile use and high acceptance of sharing technologies.
I guess there's the other thing around sort of beyond funding is the business models. And again, I don't know if you're able to elaborate a little bit on the funding mechanism, but we talked about sort of the smart cities, and there's so much going on. There must be opportunities to collaborate with other either technologies or other partners or even advertisers. What's the sort of business model at this time, and what does it look like moving forward?
Sure. So in terms of how we actually make money, the service itself is, you have to pay for the time that you use while you're borrowing the batteries. So the user actually pays for, I guess, the rollout of the network. So it's very simple. You just pay 50p for 30 minutes up to a maximum of £3 a day. At which point you switch to a daily rate of £3 up to a maximum of 10 days. And then if you cross that £30 mark, you actually get to keep the battery. Right. So it's a really affordable solution, even if you do end up keeping the battery. And then once you have that, you get a year's free subscription to the network. So you can keep swapping it as many times as you want in the network. or you can just charge it at home like a regular power bank.
Right. Okay. Okay. But I guess there's useful tie-ins, because thinking through, some of the locations we touched on, sort of M&S and retail stores, but, bars and places where people hang out, and, they'd hang out at a pub longer if they had access to a battery, so they could get the Uber later on, than if they died earlier on. But is there a sort of a commercial benefit or a particular tie-in that you have with the places who host the stations?
Yeah, there's definitely some opportunities for that. I would we can't actually announce anything publicly right now, but I would suggest going out and looking at some of the batteries, because they've got some very interesting branding on it, both on the transportation side that you spoke about and the alcoholic beverage side as well. Some really interesting partnerships that we're doing at the moment.
Okay. That's one of the frustrations I've had doing this podcast so far. There's a number of people said, "Oh, we can announce it soon," and within about 3 or 4 days of publishing, it's out there. But that's all good. It's nice to be talking to companies at this stage of evolution. So, in terms of, again, as you look to grow, we touched on talent clearly being an issue as you scale a business. But as you sort of go beyond or throughout the UK and then internationalize, again, what are some of the biggest opportunities and some of the biggest challenges that you have in your mind that you'll be facing in the next year or two?
Sure. I guess some of the great things about the service are, is that we've designed it so that it is as hands-free and remotely serviceable as possible. So that's why we are moving international, I guess, much quicker than a lot of startups would with a physical product. But with that comes challenges in terms of getting adoption up and making sure that you're targeting the right types of venues in different cities. For example, we in the UK have very much a pub culture, but and doing market research in other countries and other cities, they have quite different ways of spending their free time. For example, in non-alcoholic drinking countries, it's obviously not viable to rely on the networks that pubs give you. So there are going to be lots of challenges as we expand internationally, but we're all really excited to tackle those as they come up, because I guess that's one of the most consistent things in running a startup is that there will always be new challenges.
Yeah, and that's clearly why most of us do it for the love, for the money, but also for the challenge, of course. So you mentioned a business partner. Was there 2 of you that founded, and what can you tell us a little bit of the makeup of the team so far?
Sure. So there's actually 4 of us that founded the business. Myself, I have been running product since the beginning, but very excited to be getting on a new head of product to take that over as I'm getting more and more busy with business operations.
Yeah.
And then my other co-founder, Hakeem Bouguet. So he is another engineer, but has kind of moved from engineering into the kind of sales and operations role in his previous experience. But then he brought that to ChargedUp. His background is actually in solar in Nigeria, right. And he brought that his fantastic charisma and sales charm to ChargedUp in order to sign up all of the hundreds of venues and partners that we've had so far. Yeah. Then Charlie, he's ex-Apple and actually ex-Tesla as well. So in that same space, you'll notice that there's a renewable connection with everyone. So Charlie is a fantastic business development strategist and is working on some really exciting deals, including the one that was announced this morning and a number of others, which I hope you'll see on Twitter in the next few weeks. And then finally, Forrest. So Forrest is another Pavegen alumni. So he's obviously got a real interest in battery technology, following on from Pavegen. Himself and Charlie developed a battery product out in China and went on to sell over £1 million of revenue in that product and distributed it internationally. So we all kind of have a battery and green focus. Yeah. across the board, and Forrest heads up our marketing and design, which is obviously a massive part of the company. With as you've noticed, the batteries are very green and
Yep.
very they really stand out.
Very visible. So I guess that's another one of the challenges when you start up. You have a hub of people, and in the early days you perhaps bring friends, family, or sort of associates or people from your past into the business. I think I've spoken. Well, I know I've spoken to a number of CEOs and or founders in businesses that have really enjoyed, but found a difficulty sometimes when, as the company grows, and you then have to, it starts off that you're doing bits of everything, and clearly as the company grows, you have to focus on one particular area of business. Is that something that you've enjoyed, sort of moving away a little bit from the product and the engineering side, now focusing on perhaps some of the more sort of operational, finance or leadership sort of elements of the role?
Yeah, definitely. I think it's, I really relish a new challenge. And I think getting too set on a single role would be counterproductive, and would really just create bottlenecks in the business. I read a really interesting Medium article there the other week about how a good CEO fires themselves from each of their positions that they get into. As soon as possible, because each time you become too crucial to the business, you're basically creating a bottleneck. So, for example, in my case, running product meant that if I was busy fundraising, the product would slow down. The product development would slow down. So being able to, I guess, relinquish control of things that you would hold quite dearly at the early stages is really important, and being able to spend more time focusing on the running of the business and also the vision of the business, rather than the operational minutiae.
Yeah, and I think, as you said, it is a challenge to always make sure that you nurture the business over and beyond yourself as an individual. But there's always the challenge as to using the strengths of the founding team and those early sort of staff as the company grows, and making sure that you're utilising the skills and sort of filling the gaps where they might miss. That, I guess, that brings us back to sort of the talent question. It's not always easy as a founder to accept or be self-aware enough to recognise weaknesses.
Yeah, definitely. But I think also the team is always growing and has grown so much over the process of from launch to development and iteration, and everyone is growing every day, and it's recognizing that the team that we have is so fantastic and has done such a great job so far, and is also evolving to be ready for the next challenges. Is really important to keep recognizing.
Sure. Going back to, I guess, to the expansion or the sort of the startup ecosystem. Obviously, London is a very vibrant scene. We've got an office in Munich, and we do a lot of work in Berlin, which are other two sort of very strong tech scenes. Barcelona, likewise. What sort of infrastructure or groups or hubs or networking environments or accelerators have you come across that have really been more or less much as sort of practical support for you as you've built the business?
Sure. So I guess the earliest one was the support that the guys at Exeter University gave us. Okay. They provided, post graduation, they provide people who want to found businesses with early stage funding and support and mentoring. And the real useful thing is all of the connections that they can give you. But then the next group that we were really quite involved with was the Central Research Laboratory, which is a hardware accelerator. Although we weren't actually part of the hardware accelerator, we really tapped into the, a lot of the founders were developing products with a hardware element to it and a software element, and having that ecosystem, unlocked for us by the guys at CRL was incredibly useful, and was a really great thing at the time. We then have moved across to the Founders Factory, which I was speaking about before. Mm-hmm. They have fantastic networks and can open pretty much any door across the corporate space, but also they have fantastic connections with VCs, with investors, and also just board members and the like. So that's been fantastic for us. And also just spending time with other companies at a similar stage. Maybe some slightly ahead, some slightly behind, but the challenges that the different founders face, and within growing the team, within growing the product, managing high growth, all of these things, you might not be competing over the same market, but a lot of the learnings can be shared, and we found that to be incredibly useful.
Sure. No, absolutely. I think it's vital to have those sort of ecosystems around from which everyone can benefit. I guess jumping back, I guess most entrepreneurs or founders at some point had their Lord's cricket moment, as you did. Going back to that point, what would be the sort of the key areas of advice or a warning or support you would throw out to those at the moment who are closer to that sort of the early stage moment where they have an idea, perhaps they have sort of either a sketch in their mind or on a piece of paper of a product or a service or something they want to bring to market? What are sort of the any particular advice that you would give to those people at that particular stage of their journey?
Sure. I'd say it's quite an obvious one, but it often gets overlooked, especially by people who've been in industry for a long time. Is actually making sure that there is a demand for the idea that you have, and realizing that often that very first idea that you have is going to have to be iterated upon, completely ripped up and started again in some cases, before it gets what we call product market fit. The really useful advice is to look at things like the MVP framework of minimum viable products, and find something that you can test as quickly as possible, as cheaply as possible, before really committing too much in terms of your time, in terms of your financial resources. The example in ChargedUp would be going to the festival with a load of power banks, and trying to get people to pay for them. And once you have that, that proof that people are willing to pay for even just a very concierged version of the service that you want to provide in the future, it not only gives you and the team massive confidence, but it's going to give investors confidence. And then you can, raise money in order to help you do it in a much better way. Actually developing something that does it automatically in our case, rather than, myself and Hakeem having to give out every power bank and take deposits on a card machine. I think getting something where you can test it, and make sure that people are willing and want the thing that you're trying to produce. It's not just something that you want; it's something that the market wants. Is really crucial before kind of, I guess, sinking too much time and effort into it.
Yeah, I guess that's hugely valid. So something that's very obvious but easily overlooked, because most people who start a business clearly have an absolute belief in it, but it's whether other people do it's going to make you successful or otherwise. Just in closing, we touched on this before. I often ask those who guests on the podcast for any particular books or that they've learned from or enjoyed or been challenged by most in the last year or two. We touched on sort of other mediums, but are there particular sort of external sources of learning that you use or would cite or would share?
Sure. So as a millennial, you can imagine, I don't read so many books anymore, but I listen to a lot of audiobooks and podcasts, and some of the ones that I really enjoyed recently, Reid Hoffman, Masters of Scale is a fantastic one. Looking at how to, like he says, blitz scale the business. And actually that book is fantastic as well. Recently came out by the same guy, the founder of LinkedIn, on how to, really rapidly scale a business. And a lot of the learnings that, he gives in that book are directly applicable to the stage we're at right now. I guess some other ones on the podcast front, we're doing a podcast right now, so it's a good place to start. Things like the NPR show how I built this. Really, really good for understanding the fact that you're not alone in the experiences that you've had as a founder in terms of building the business from a really early stage. There's some other really good ones on the investment side, like A16Z. Another one that's really good, actually, I've got into recently is the 20-minute VC. It's just a really intense hit of knowledge in every single episode. I really, really recommend that one.
Cool. Okay. And you mentioned Medium, which is another source that I use or read quite often, which, a bit hit and miss at times, but it's another good source of articles that can sometimes be challenging and useful.
Yeah, definitely. I really love going through Medium. I've got some good subscriptions on there. And yeah, the thing is, it's a short form. It's similar to a podcast in that you can digest it quite quickly. But it kind of forces people to be quite succinct and get to the point. Which I often find in some of the business books, they can waffle it out over a few chapters when it could be just a Medium post that you can read in 10 minutes.
Sure, that's a fair point. I guess the other one is, of course, if you're utilizing all of this information on the device, you want it to be well charged, which is another good excuse to be engaged with ChargedUp. Listen, Hugo, I've really appreciated and enjoyed the conversation with you. I look forward to hearing the news as it comes out in the coming days. We'll share with the podcast audience the various links to some of the news stories and to the ChargedUp site, etc. And we look forward to watching this space.
Great stuff. Thank you so much, David.
Thank you for joining us again on the This Week in Cleantech podcast. I hope you enjoyed this episode, and if so, please do share it with friends, colleagues, and across any social media platforms. It really does help us out and help us to expand our listenership to keep as many people as possible in the loop with the clean tech sector. We look forward to you joining us again next week, but until then, goodbye from me and goodbye from David as well. See you next time.